Welcome to part 2 of my ghost story. Years later, but better late than never, as they say. In part 1, I talked about my time working for my mom's cleaning company. Specifically, I worked her contract at a physical therapy building that was at one point a hospital. I told you about the door slamming, the palm tree being dragged and tossed into the pool, the repeated door knocking with no one on the other side, and finally, the shadow entity that I saw sprinting at me. Since it's been a while, I'd recommend giving part 1 a listen just to get the refresher and put yourself in the right mood. As I record this though, it's obviously been years since then, and in hindsight, I still stand by what I said. The place was, and still is, creepy. I also have no explanations for the repeated door banging from that one night, the palm tree, or the shadow person. The door slamming, I'm willing to accept that it is possible the air conditioning turning on and off could have simply produced negative pressure in areas resulting in doors slamming shut all around the building, but I will say that the door closing tended to be staggered throughout the shift, and on some nights it didn't happen at all. So we can just chalk that up to unconfirmed. The stories in part 1 are what I'd consider inexplicable events during times of complete lucidity. I was an adult at the time that they occurred. I was wide awake and working. I was sober and not under the influence of anything when they happened. In part 2, things are a little different. I was younger when a lot of these experiences happened. I also wouldn't exactly call myself a reliable narrator for some of these experiences, and I'll explain why in a bit. I'll also be saving the most disturbing paranormal experience for last, so make sure you stick around to hear it. I guess we should start at the earliest memory I have of anything paranormal. I was a kid somewhere in the 4 to 7 year old range, and my cousins lived 2 doors down from us. Child's Play was still very popular, and it terrified me. The idea of a doll being possessed and going around killing people was too scary for my little brain to handle, and so I naturally developed a fear of dolls. As an adult, I still have a healthy aversion to dolls, specifically porcelain ones, and in my defense, porcelain dolls just are objectively creepy as hell. So I'm a kid that's afraid of dolls. And wouldn't you know it, the universe decided that my mom should be the exact kind of person that collects these creepy dolls that I'm scared of, and collect them she did. Her and my aunt, my mom's sister, collect these freaking dolls. So anyways, back to the story. I slept over at my cousin's house. It was the one and only time I remember ever spending the night there, and everything was normal. Me and my cousins played all day doing whatever it is that kids do. Things got weird though once nighttime hit. My aunt's house had tons of these realistic porcelain dolls in every room that ranged in size from small to like 2 feet tall. Once night hit and it was bedtime, all my cousins were in their rooms and in bed, like they were scared to leave the bed or something. They told me not to leave the bed because once it was dark, that was when the dolls began to move, and if you didn't bother them, they wouldn't bother you. So obviously, I was freaked out to the max. Once they told me that, sleep wasn't really an option anymore. The luckiest thing for me was that I was able to share a bed with one of my cousins, and we all slept in the same room together, so I didn't feel alone. While my cousins all slept, there I was curled up in bed, looking around and listening. I remember hearing the small pitter-patter of feet coming from different parts of the house, and I remember seeing small shadows moving around on the walls. I listened and watched for hours. No one got out of bed. At some point, I wasn't able to keep my eyes open anymore, and I ended up falling asleep. If memory serves me right, I think some dolls were also in different places than I remembered from the day before. I don't know if my cousins were just messing with me, but if they were, then it worked because that night is a core memory from my childhood. Something similar also happened a few years later in the house that I grew up in. I remember being absolutely terrified at night because of the 20-something dolls my mom had in just the living room. I saw like 2 or 3 of them turn their heads towards me and stare at me. It freaked me out so bad that I ended up scaring my entire family because at night I would go around the entire house and turn all the dolls around so that they couldn't look out towards me or anyone else. So from their perspective, one day all the dolls are normal, and the next morning they're all turned around. It freaked everyone out, but I didn't want these things looking at me anymore. I did own up to it and admitted what I did. Fortunately, my parents were understanding of the situation, I think. After that, I pretty much slept in the living room from that point forward in the house because that was the room that my dad slept in. Did I actually see a few dolls' heads move towards me and stare at me? I don't know. Maybe my childish mind just didn't understand how perspective works, so all the dolls just looked like they were staring at me no matter what angle I was at. The only issue with that, though, is that I remember being terrified because I thought I saw a doll's head move and turn towards me, then return to normal once it figured out that I saw it. It acted like I'd caught it in the middle of doing something bad. My time in the childhood home was basically from when I was a baby to like 4th grade. In 5th grade, we moved to a newer, nicer house in a different area. I could be off by a year though, I'm not really sure. We either moved in at the start of the 5th grade or 6th grade. Those details don't matter as much though, in my opinion. All that matters is that I'm in a new house at a new location. As far as I know, no previous owner has died in the house, but pretty soon after we moved in, the activity started. Before I get into the activity, I think it'd help a little if I tried to explain the layout of the house. The house had 2 front doors. One door was approximately in the center of the house and was probably designed to be the actual front door of the home since it was the closest to the street. The door opened up into a room which was turned into one of my siblings' bedrooms and eventually ended up becoming the computer room office area. We never used this door, it was basically permanently locked. The other door was to the right of the house and recessed a bit since it was in our carport. This was the door that was functionally used as the front door to our home. You walk in through that door and immediately find yourself in the kitchen. To the right, you see the dining table, our washer-dryer area, and the pantry. To your left, you'd see our living room area and a hallway. So if you were to turn your body and face the living room, you'd see a room with a door to your left, a door to your right, and a hallway. The door to your right is the door that took you to our backyard. The door to your left is the area of the house that the other front door opened up to. Just think of it as the office area. And the hallway has 4 doors in it, 2 on the left, 2 on the right. From closest to farthest, on the right side, it was the main bathroom and the master bedroom. On the left side, it was my brother's bedroom and then my bedroom. So my bedroom was across the hall from my parents' room. Now that you have a rough idea of the house's layout, it'll be easier for you to imagine things as I tell the different stories. A lot of the activity that happened in the house happened in the kitchen area. The way that this manifested was the cabinet doors opening and closing. It could have been a wide open door slamming shut, a closed cabinet door completely opening up, and everything in between. There were even times where multiple cabinet doors would be continuously opening and closing, or sometimes it would just be one that would open and close. With this, my parents would take the, if it isn't bothering us, we won't bother it route. I mean, all that was happening was a few doors opening and closing, right? There's no harm in that. We told family members about it, and it'd always get brushed off as something else. It's probably just the air pressure changing from when the air conditioning turns on and off. It's the house settling. Maybe you have a mouse problem and they're bumping into the cabinet doors whenever they run around. Those were the answers, and those answers never lasted once they experienced it for themselves. One of my uncles had the first answer, and one of my sisters had the mouse answer. Well, my uncle came over one day, and when he heard and saw these cabinet doors opening and closing on their own, he asked what that was, and my dad simply said, "I told you, man, it's the ghost." My uncle didn't seem convinced, and then my dad told the ghost to stop, and as if on command, the opening and closing stopped. My sister had the mouse idea, and once she saw it for herself, she didn't seem as confident in that mouse idea, but she stuck to it. I remember joking and just saying something like, "Yeah, lady, we have a bunch of rats in the cabinets just sitting there opening and closing stuff to mess with us." Luckily, in this new house, all the dolls migrated to the master bedroom and weren't used as home decor. Not so luckily for me, my room was across the master bedroom. I personally made it my job to make sure that the bedroom door across the hall was always closed. I didn't want to see it, and every time I had to shut that door, there were like 3 or 4 porcelain dolls looking right back at me. So I'd cringe because I would have to see them in order to shut the door. Here is where I think I become an unreliable narrator, at least for part of the story. I suffer from sleep paralysis on a pretty regular basis. I don't know how it is for other people, but when it happens to me, it is indistinguishable from reality up to a certain point, and then I realize I can't move. At that point, it registers in my head that I'm having a sleep paralysis moment, and I can usually wake myself up and get out of it. Present day adult me can recognize and fix it pretty quickly, most of the time. Not all the time, but like 8 times out of 10. Back when this story happens, I think the manifestation of my sleep paralysis problem was just in its infancy. So, I remember one night waking up to the sound of my door handle jiggling. Not turning, but jiggling like something was struggling to get it to turn and open the door. It was maybe 10 seconds of something playing with his door handle after I'd woken up, and eventually it began to turn. I pretended to be asleep as I saw the small silhouette of a figure wearing a dress standing in my doorway. It was one of the frickin' 2-foot tall porcelain dolls from my mom's bedroom. It walked into my room and I froze up. My bed wasn't very high off the ground, so by the time this thing was next to my bed, it was literally level with my head and it began talking. I don't know what it said, but it sounded like incoherent gibberish being pumped directly into my ear. I continued to act like I was asleep and rolled over to face away from the door. This thing stayed next to my bed, by my head, and just kept talking in my ear for a few more minutes. Eventually it stopped. I heard some footsteps, and the door to my room closed, and then almost immediately after that, I heard the door to my parents' room close. I got up, grabbed my blanket, and went to sleep in the living room with my dad. Before we go into the next story, there is a detail about me that you need to be aware of. I didn't like closets, doors, drawers, and dressers to be open at all when I went to sleep. So everything was shut before I went to bed, and at this point in time, I had a bed that faced my closet directly and 2 large standing dressers in the room. For some reason, I'd woken up in the middle of the night, and I distinctly remember 3 thoughts I had when I'd woken up. 1, I checked my clock and it was 3:30 in the morning, so sleep schedule ruined. 2, it was a school night and I was pissed that I'd woken up so early. And 3, why is my closet open? As I was wondering why my closet was open, I looked around my room and realized everything was open. All the drawers in my room were open, my closet doors were open, and my bedroom door was open. I was done with it. I was already annoyed that I was awake, I was annoyed it was a school night, and I was annoyed that I was still tired, so I just said screw it and tried to go back to bed. I'd shut my eyes for maybe a few minutes when I was woken up again with the sound of a loud bang. And everything was shut. And at that point, I got up, grabbed my blanket, and went to sleep in the living room with my dad. You can kind of see the pattern that's starting to develop here. Let's fast forward a few more years. I'm in the same house, and I'm a little older now, about 15. All my siblings are out of the house, my parents are divorced, and through a weird series of events, somehow I kind of just ended up living by myself in that house for like 3 months or something. It was a pretty sweet setup as far as any teenager was concerned. I had a house to myself, had groceries dropped off to me, and didn't have to pay any of the bills. I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, but if I'm being honest, the idea of it was cool. In reality, all I did was cook whatever I wanted and gamed all day or went to my friend's house and played games over there. This incident occurred during this period of time when I was living by myself in the house. I'd just gotten dropped off at home by one of my friends from school. I won't say her name for privacy reasons, but we lived in the same area, so she was just nice enough to drop me off on her way to her house. I was a new kid in that school, so really appreciated it at the time. There's a few details I want to say in advance because the actual incident only lasted maybe a minute or two. It was super quick. 1. I'm older at this point. I'm not some 4-year-old that's scared of dolls. I'm a teenager that finds them creepy. 2. I was a decently sized football player, been in a lot of fights, including some with grown men at the time, so I'm not very afraid of confrontation at this point. 3. It's the middle of the day when this happened, not the middle of the night. I wasn't asleep. I was very much awake, coherent, and lucid. 4. My mom has a very distinct accent when she speaks English. And 5. There was no one else in that house other than me at the time that this happened. I really want to emphasize that. So, let's get back to it. I get dropped off at home after school. There are no other cars in my driveway and 0 cars once my friend leaves to go to her house. I walk in and immediately start my routine of cooking and then gaming. On this particular day, my dinner of choice was a cup of ramen. I'd been home for maybe a couple minutes, set my backpack on the table, had the ramen in the microwave in about a 2-minute wait. When it finishes cooking, I grab it, stir it up, and wait for it to cool down. As I'm waiting, I hear the most disturbing thing that I have ever personally heard. My mom's voice. I hear it coming from the master bedroom, and it's telling me to come here and ven mijo. The only issue with hearing the voice is that I'm the only one in the house, and if my mom needed me for something, she's not the type of person that's talking, she's yelling to get my attention. I stared down the hallway towards the room for about 30 seconds, ramen in hand, and didn't see anything come from out of the room. Nope, fuck that, I said as I walked out of the house with my ramen. I called my dad and told him what had happened, told him I wasn't going into the house until he checked it out and gave me the all clear, and told him which friend's house I'd be at until he called me after he checked out the place. I don't know what would have happened if I went to that room when it told me to, and I don't want to know. I'm a big fan of horror movies, but your boy isn't checking out that situation. This one was easily the most disturbing thing that's happened to me, worse than the incidents from part 1. The thought of something mimicking the voice of a family member to lure you into a different part of the house is horrifying. I'm getting goosebumps again just thinking and talking about it. Yeah, the doll stories could be chalked up to the hyperactive imagination of a kid that's scared of Chucky. The one whispering things in my ear and the doors all opening and shutting at the same time could be explained away with sleep paralysis or maybe my tired mind doing weird things at 3 in the morning. The cabinets in the kitchen opening and closing are a bit more difficult to explain away because that had multiple witnesses on multiple occasions. The mimic talking to me with my mom's voice happened. I'm the only witness, but I know that I'm not a crazy person. Plus, when I factor in that it was the middle of the day, there's no sleep or sleep paralysis issues at play, and I was older when it happened. Not as old as when I was working at the physical therapy place in part 1, but 15 and 16-year-olds aren't dumb. I wasn't some dumb kid. We did have a bird at one point that could mimic my mom's voice pretty well, but at this point in time, that bird was long gone. So, I don't know what it could have been or what it wanted, but I know that it happened, and I guess that's all that really matters. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, like, subscribe, rate the podcast, and share it with your friends. It helps a lot. Thanks for listening. This is Myths, History, and D&D, and I hope to see you next time.